anniversary. I also asked him for permission to give out his phone number. Okay. Now, I'm giving you that because he is at home, and he is recuperating. And while he has his close friends in terms of his reference library, etc., it's good to hear from colleagues in the trade and admirers and old friends who may not have his phone number. Yeah. So being a friend, I have his permission to give it to you if you're so inclined. And that is area code. Take your pens out. This is a test. We're out of pen. 216-831-1392. Cards and letters, flowers are nice. Heck with the bonbons. We'd really like to talk to a human being. As a personal note, I can tell you afternoons are better than mornings. So, and he never misses the 6 o'clock news. So you have a window, say, from noon to 6 to call if it's at all convenient.
What's the number again?
216-831-1392. And I have Henry's permission and also that of his daughter Suzanne to give it out. So we're clear.
And he does like phone calls. Question?
Yeah, Bill Hearn from the Canadian law firm Macmillan. Jessica, you referred to the CIC, Canadian International Council's report written by Michael Kurgan on the border. And one of the recommendations in that report, Michael, of course, is the Joint Border Commission. I'd appreciate if you could talk a little bit about that, and I'd appreciate the response from James and Jessica as to the likelihood of that actually coming about.
Bill, how kind of you to ask. My sense in U.S.-Canada relations is that when there's a pretty tough process are going along at the same time, acid rain comes to mind, that it's a good time for the two heads of government to get two trusted officials. They can be either current ministers or secretaries, but I think better, in fact, in this case, people who are knowledgeable of the border but not having operational roles, to look at the problem, work with officials, but have a very defined timeline to get back with them that are looking at this in a completely different light. The advantage is that they don't necessarily have a fixed prejudice about the issue. They can free up the cabinet secretaries and the ministers who are extremely busy. I mean, right now, Janet Napolitano on her side is absolutely immersed in what's going on in Mexico, and yes, we'll probably get a visit from her in about 2 weeks, but the focus is not there right now. Mexico is the issue from the security perspective, and our own Peter Van Loan is pretty busy doing other things. So the advantage is you can get two people who are mandated by their heads of government and come back to report. I think it's very timely. As Jim has mentioned, we have a new administration that I think is prepared to look at the world in slightly different ways. We've got a situation where the economics are really challenging for North America. We're struggling to find markets abroad. We're finding that other economic groupings are starting to pull together. The European Union is now absorbing Eastern Europe, which is, I think, we're seeing regional groupings in Latin America. And if we don't pull together in North America, my sense of it is that we will start to lose market share and competitiveness internationally. So this is a time to start to look at the border in a way of how can we make it work better, because our economies are integrated and they'll continue to be integrated. So this is the idea, Bill, is you have a Manly Ridge. Now they were serving office at the time. These could be somebody else, but who have the confidence of their heads of government, have a defined timeline, 6 months to report back to the respective heads of government, and then move forward. Acid rain probably is one of our best examples that went quite well. So that's the idea.
Well, when I started reading your report, and I knew it, you say at the very beginning that you're going to recommend this commission, and I'm so skeptical of new bureaucratic structures because look at what we have with the SPP. And, but I can tell you that by the time I reached the end of your report, very short report, so everybody should read it, is that I was convinced that this was a good idea. If you could have people of stature heading it. Only if you have of stature heading it is it going to work line to make the recommendations. But I have to tell you, we could fill this room with reports, and I've read a lot of them. We could fill this room with reports that have been written, and they just collect dust on the shelf. And if we're going to do this, it has to be done with full force and vigor. And I would recommend that this group itself look at this and then strongly support it if it agrees that it should be supported. But I was convinced by the time I reached the end of the report that this was a very good idea.
I would simply add, I think they should be people not only of stature, but people with very real authority to follow up. Otherwise, it's a really good blue ribbon report. They've got to have authority at Homeland Security, State Transportation, Coast Guard, Trade, Attorney General, Agriculture. They've got to have real authority. And I think if they focused on it, they could do a lot of good.
Years ago on a basis, there was an annual meeting of ministers from Canada and the United States, and that ended. I don't know why, and perhaps Michael, you might know why, but I remember I'd fly down with them. It'd be, this was in the Trudeau years, and that every year there was a meeting that Minister of Finance, Trade and Commerce, as it was called then, and what was the Energy Department, whatever its name was at the time, and so forth. And they would meet as a group with their U.S. counterparts as a group. And the meeting would last all day, and sometimes over to the next day. Now, another mechanism that was employed when chemistry between ministers, between leaders, doesn't work, and it can depend on either side of the border. Diefenbaker and Kennedy never got along. Pearson got along famously with Kennedy, mixed with LBJ. Trudeau and Nixon didn't get along, but in the Trudeau and Nixon years, John Turner was the intermediary, and he was, when he was finance minister, with George Shultz and others, and even go to the White House and see the president. I think that, Jim, you mentioned that this relationship with Harper and Obama is very close, but I think the Chrétien-Clinton relationship was also a very close one, but the Chrétien-Bush one was not very good, but that may have been more the fault of Bush than Chrétien. I'm not quite sure, but it's very important. But happening when the leaders don't always get along, there's sometimes senior cabinet ministers who play a similar role.
And I'd like to comment on that. I think Jessica said earlier, too, there's been an incredible interchange between cabinet already, and that has happened. And a little bit of that happened even before the trip to Ottawa by President Obama, although they were trying to keep that under wraps until they had their meeting. And of course, Chrétien was fabulous to me, so now you'll hear nothing but good about Jean Chrétien from Jim Blanchard. I love the guy. And I know how he got elected. They had 3 mandates too. But initially, he did not want to visibly be too close to President Clinton, because he had felt that the Bush and Reagan relationship with Mulroney was fawning all the time over the U.S. president. So he was cautious, but eventually we couldn't pry them off the golf course together. That took a while. But I do want to mention that I think there should be an annual meeting between the president and the prime minister, an annual meeting, and probably semi-annual between the state and foreign affairs. But I will tell you that when I was ambassador, I think now as well, the cabinet members were back and forth all the time. It wasn't just annual. I mean, they were back and forth all the time. We had a regular revolving door at our residence in Ottawa with the different cabinet, and they would meet for a day or two. Everybody from CIA to Justice, you name it, they were all there all the time, as well as the military. And, you know, there was so much military back and forth. It would have scared the Canadians to know how much. The whole entire Joint Chiefs of Staff had lunch with their counterparts in our house in Ottawa. Flew in a 747. There's no country in the world where that can happen except our two. So there's a lot of interaction, and I think every day, agency heads, bureau directors, the interchange, the relations are just overwhelming, and just to stay on top of that is a real job for a consul general or an ambassador. So it's really going on, David, and I think it's going to it's going to increase in ways that are going to be very important to our two countries, because all of a sudden they're getting together and they're talking about how we can work together. They're not talking about differences, because the challenge right now with the economy and the world is so serious, no one's nitpicking anymore, which is a good thing.
I was going to ask in relation to that, to talk about this as being a period of opportunity. Both you and Michael have, and Jessica, that you look at the agenda, though, that the administration has faced on really urgent issues. Now, the United States developing the China relationship is obviously very important. Restoring the Russian relationship is very important. The Middle East is very important. Solving Mexico's urgency issues are very important. Getting the financial crisis resolved is very important, and so forth. How does, and when you look at the urgency of those things, how does Canada get attention? That's what Michael and Jim can answer that.
Came to Canada first to set a tone, and Jessica's absolutely right. I get in and out of Washington a fair amount, and it's just a wall of ministers going down. Not only that, they're getting excellent access on the Hill, which is equally important. And that's the thing that one doesn't sort of remember all the time, that much in the Canada-US relationship is set by the other branch of government, which is, by the way, in the Constitution, the first branch of government, which is Congress. So that's very important. How do we get attention? Well, I think the economics are probably that the fact that Canada's in Afghanistan has given Canada a certain degree of access in Washington. But the question is, what sort of percentages are we talking about? Is it 3%, 5% more access? Slightly more access. The decision for Canada to be in Afghanistan or not be in Afghanistan should not be predicated on whether or not it's going to give us that more or less access to the United States. It should be obviously predicated on what is the Canadian interest with respect to Afghanistan. Is this something which Canada should be doing? Is it something which has some future, et cetera, et cetera? And one can have a very good debate about that. We often say that our access to the White House is very often triggered by our role internationally. It is true up to a point. But we decide first, and if they coincide, and they most often do with the United States, then that's a good thing. It gives us access to the executive branch of government. But I do come back to the fact that is the economic relationship, is the independence of the two countries economically, and that often is played in Congress. And that's where we need to ensure that our role, our ministers, our ambassador, our embassy is very, very active in Congress. It is essentially an interdomestic relationship we have with the United States. International, two equal jurisdictions, but the major drivers in our relationship essentially are domestic, economic, energy, agriculture, environment, etc. And those play out in both branches of government.
There is no relationship more important than the United States-Canada relationship. Full stop, period. National security is dependent upon prosperity. We're talking about the largest trading relationship in the history of the world. And if that can't garner attention in Washington, then I think we've got a problem, a big problem. But when I was Consul General, Canadians would come up to me and say, you know, Americans don't know anything about Canada. And my response to that was, and just whose fault do you think that is?
You know, it's interesting, as you know. We know more about you than you do about us. That is true, but that's not always saying a whole lot. You know, America's more than New York and Disney World and California and Florida. I used to have a map of the Great Lakes in my library in Ottawa, and I used to, when someone would do that, a Canadian, I'd ask him, what's that? They never got it. Maybe George would have, but they never got the fact. It was a Great Lake surrounding Michigan. I mean, it was really unusual. There's a lack of information here on both sides, particularly on our side, and we really have to do a lot to inform and explain our neighbor next door, which often I wrote in my book was like a one-way mirror, where, you know, when you're up in Canada, you're looking out, you're watching the crazy Americans doing whatever we do. The Americans look forward, it's just a mirror. They think it's a mirror of themselves. So we have a lot of work to do. But I would say in dealing with the world, I mentioned in my little talk, Barack Obama, our president, is a multilateralist. He really wants to work with the world. This should fit very nicely into the Canadian psyche, because Canada has always loved multilateral organization, not just because they want to be, or you want to be, those of you who are Canadian, part of the world community. The truth is, I think Barack Obama is going to listen a lot to Canada and consult before we start working with the rest of the world. That's why that first trip was so important. So important. And I think Canada will have a lot of influence over the United States if it takes the time to, as it is right now, to talk about the big issues and not nitpick salmon and lumber and stuff, but stick to the big agenda in the world. And I think Canada will have a lot of influence, because if you can't convince the Canadians, I always used to say this, if we can't convince the Canadians that we've got the right policies in the world, there's probably something wrong with our policy. And a lot of people around the world think the same thing. If the Canadians aren't with the Americans, what's going on here?
I guess if Obama's going to listen a lot to Canada, we better make sure we have something useful. Dan has asked me to wind this up because his Saturday night bowling league starts at 10 o'clock. But before I do that, I had promised that the panelists could have one last sort of 1 minute or thereabouts word on just some last thought they might want to leave with us. So let's start at the far end and come back.
You didn't tell me about that, David. I think Jim has got it right in the sense that this is a new beginning in this relationship. We will be resetting this relationship because the cast of characters at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue are somewhat different. Of course, the last 2 years, the Democrats have dominated the Congress, but the pressures and the dynamics between both ends the last 8 years, and they are closer, generally speaking, to where Canada is in its multilateral, its international, and to some extent its economics. So I think that we have to be worried about protectionism, to be honest with you. But it is a good opportunity to engage. I think our government in Ottawa is doing that. It's got a good groundwork to work with, and I think, as that was quoted so many times today, Rahm Emanuel's comment that no good crisis should go to waste. This is an opportunity for us to work with the United States in dealing with some of the challenges, which I think are pretty grave and haven't been seen in our country and in the United States for a good several decades.
The Canada-U.S. relation, the Canada-U.S. is not just a partnership that works. It's the envy of the world when diplomats and leaders look at things. And people do make a difference. And so the reason I'm here is I got a nice letter from Henry King. This is my third trip to this forum. My partner Rick Newcomb reminded me of it and forced me to deal with it, and I couldn't say no to Henry. So, I hope we'll all call him, or not all at once, but I just want to remember him fondly, because that's why I'm here, as much as I've enjoyed, by the way, not to be on a panel with you again. Mike, David, but really to Henry, a truly great citizen of the world and a wonderful friend.
I'm really sorry that Dr. King couldn't be here tonight and that I never had an opportunity to meet him. I really regret that. I guess I would just repeat what I said earlier, that I truly believe that this is Canada's decade, and that I really want Canadians to step up, be active in Washington, as Ambassador Kerrigan just mentioned, that it seems that you all are doing. And I'm very interested to be an observer and perhaps a participant in Canada's decade in North America. Thank you.
I guess I'm allowed a last word as well, and that is, I first encountered Henry King when the phone rang one day, and this voice of somebody I'd never met said, "Now I've got Gary Huffbauer on this conference we're having in April from the Institute for International Economics, and you should be the Canadian who's the other person on the panel, and this is the date, and this is where it's being held." And that was it. And I have a last thought as well, and that is that we've talked a lot about the Canada-U.S. relationship, but I think that we can't think of that relationship in isolation from what's happening in the global community. And we have to look at the relationship and how it helps decades of how do we create a global community that is stable, peaceful, prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. That's what contribution North America can make to the global solutions that I think will be most important. On your behalf, I'd like to thank all the panelists. I think they have provided us with great food for thought after a very nice meal, and that we could talk about many of these things for much longer. I'd love to debate much more on the whole issue of oil sands and climate change and what's going to happen in the U.S. on climate change, because I think that's going to be a very complicated issue, and I'm not that optimistic, but that's for another day. So on your behalf, I'd like to thank our three panelists. I think they've all given us, as I say, good food for thought. You got your bowling shoes on?
I do the weed bowling. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. For those of you headed to the Intercontinental, your shuttle is waiting, and we do keep the reception area open to continue these conversations. We do have the facility for some time tonight for those of you that want to stay. The shuttle to the Glidden House will run for, it's about 11 of you that need to get back right now. I'd encourage you to get on. I think he's been running here for the past several minutes. We will start prompt and early tomorrow at 9 o'clock over at the law school, which is right across the street from the Glidden House. It's the one of the most magnificent buildings on the Case Western Reserve University campus. For those of you that are attending the Great Lakes sessions, you will be in the Moot Courtroom, which is on the main level, the ground level floor, it's room A59. For those of you that will be attending the NAFTA International Trade sessions, those will be upstairs in room A57. That's you just walk up a short flight of stairs and you'll be in there. There will be a number of student docents to help you find your way in the morning, but 9 o'clock is the start time tomorrow. But we do encourage you to enjoy the reception area, as well as to pass a note on to Henry that we'll be taking over to him on Sunday. So thank you for your attendance this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the morning. Thank you.